Good morning. Welcome to our live talk 4, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Sarah Kearns, who is a lecturer here at the University of Aberdeen in the School of Education. Sarah's background is very varied. She has been a teacher, a social worker, and works in family therapy. She has also done a lot of work with interprofessional groups around working with families. Sarah's going to talk to us this morning about understanding a family as a system. So without any more ado, I'll pass over to Sarah. We'll take questions at the end, so as usual, if you'd like to post questions on the page underneath the video, we'll try and feed those into Sarah at the end of her talk.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be doing this today. I have to say this is a new experience for me to speak about my area of work at one remove from folk. So you'll bear with me if I'm not as slick as I might be, but I'm delighted to be doing this and hope this will be useful to you. Just to say, first of all, before I start on the slides that I have for you, what the aims of this session are for me, that I hope will be helpful. First of all, to talk, to give you a flavour, I suppose, in a short time, but of the kind of work that I do with families in the community still, and I keep that up as part of my work here, and also how the model of family systems, how I go about I suppose teaching that way of thinking to those who are working with families out in the community, and to convey those ways of thinking to you, and hopefully to trigger some thoughts for you about how this model might fit with what you do, and to give you some illustrations of that. Through the linking with the family scenario that I gave you at the end, which I hope will bring this to life for you. Okay, Aileen, if you want to put up the first slide for me. This is an image that I've chosen to reflect, I suppose, some of the ways that I work with families. I often use imaging activities, exercises, to help families to think about how it feels for them as a family, how they define themselves and their current experience as a family. This one is common, I would say. It does bring a consensus often amongst families that there is a complex mixture of a strong sense of connection in various ways, and you can explore that through the strands of wire and how they connect, but also their experience of the barbs, the pain, the discomfort, the difficulties and the problems that family life usually throws up for everyone, and it helps to identify and bring families together to discuss where those might be uncomfortable, and for which individual members as well as the family as a whole. It brings the family often together to see their problems as common problems rather than as residing in one member of the family. So that's where I wanted to start with you, just to, I suppose, give you an idea that there are a variety of different ways, and I'm sure you yourselves in your work with families, use similar methods too, to enable families to start discussing the painful bits. Okay, thank you, Aileen. And this brings me to the idea of the family as a system, which is often referred to as systems theory in relation to other aspects of working in the human services, but is really particularly relevant to working with families and understanding how they operate. And I would say most family therapists who are working to enable families to change and to resolve some of the areas of discomfort do have this systemic model in mind as they work. So what does it mean and where does it come from? It marked a very significant shift in understanding the family, I suppose, back in the 1940s and 50s, in relation to a move from just looking internally within individuals for their problems, their ways of operating, their patterns of behavior. So a reaction against Freud and the Freudian school, if you like, to looking at behaviors and issues for people within social groups as being far more related to the interpersonal and the relationship aspects of human experience. And that was really the start of, really, I suppose, a major change in working with families. And a lot of research about that time into how this might work in terms of working with problems within families. The early research was really about looking at the problems of families with a schizophrenic member, and how the behavior, the patterns of behavior around that particular individual within the family often maintained the behavior rather than helping to resolve the issues that it presented. So that was the early kind of history of systems theory. And central to it is the idea that blaming individual members or seeing individual problems as individuals within the family is essentially not likely to produce positive change, because it encourages the family to not take collective responsibility for what's going on, and also sees in terms of system that you can't understand the behavior of one family member without looking at all the triggers and the dynamics between all the family members as a whole. It comes from an engineering model originally that the cogs in a machine, I suppose, that all have their part to play in how the machine operates, and that you can't actually see the machine as a whole without looking at all the various parts and how they operate and how they react to each other. I'm sure some of you may be thinking, well, okay, good to take away blame from individual members of the family, but where does this leave us in terms of issues like violence, domestic violence, and child abuse within the family? And clearly that is a huge ethical dilemma, in that there are individual family members who need to take responsibility for the impact of their actions on other family members. But it is a case of working with accountability and responsibility rather than blame. And that's, I think, a big question that I haven't got time to go into now in this short presentation. But the early family therapists would have seen issues like violence and abuse within the family as being equally shared. And I think with the advent of feminism, this was clearly seen as not ethically appropriate. And family therapists have worked with this kind of ethical dilemma ever since. But it doesn't get away from the fact that a destructive blaming kind of dynamic doesn't help to work with issues like violence and abuse. Okay, so all parts interdependent, dynamic, and emergent, i.e. have the potential to change from a number of different angles. And often when I go into working with a family, and maybe for the first few sessions, what I'm presented with is the family saying it's all his fault or it's all her fault, and the focus is very much on one person, and I'm being asked to fix that one person. Working towards a systemic view for families to actually see themselves as being, as having all having an equal stake in making family life more pleasant and more satisfying for everyone, is a huge part of that early stage, and it does allow change from a number of different angles of where to start and who might be open to looking at how their particular behaviour impacts on others. And the idea of circular patterns rather than linear patterns is a very important part of systemic thinking, that often behaviours aren't cause and effect in any kind of linear way, but do work in circular ways. Okay, Aileen, thank you. Just to give you an example, and I hope you can see some of the detail of this, but this is a fairly average pattern within families at, stressful times of the day, if you like, where a number of domestic tasks have to be undertaken, and how the different roles of the members of the family are shared out. In this case, as I'm trying to illustrate the circularity of the patterns, it's hard to see where this problematic pattern starts. But if I look, just for argument's sake, to start at the top, where we have a young girl of 8 who's needing attention at the time when mum's back from work, dad's back from work, and she wants a bit of me time, and mum is in trying to get tea cooked, can't get that done because the little girl is wanting to help, and that kind of activity that we're all familiar with. So she asked Dad to help, but anticipating that he won't do it as she would like him to. He won't play with the little girl as she might want him to. So she's got one eye on that happening. And because he is aware that she's got one eye on what he's doing and doesn't feel trusted and so on, just to get on with it, he doesn't engage fully. So mum then lingers over them to anticipate daughter saying, Dad's not playing with me properly. The young girl is making the most of that in terms of getting the attention, however negative, from both of them. And then mum again trying to get stuff done, and this leads to the little girl demanding more attention. So I hope that kind of illustrates that you get back to where you start with all that, but actually in terms of the stress of individual members and how individual members see this pattern, you could start in a number of different places to work with, I suppose, raising awareness of what's happening, because often these patterns are embedded in rather unconscious and automatic ways. Okay, thank you, Aileen. Power is a key feature of this, clearly, within families. Who tends to be in charge and at what time and of what tasks? How is that kind of control and authority exerted in terms of, the situation that you've just seen? You could see Dad being pushed rather into a peripheral role at this kind of situation. How does he feel about that in terms of his sense of importance within the family? And this may well be impacted on by external systems in terms of, he may have had a rough day in the workplace. Little girl may have had a difficult day at school where she's been needing attention from the teacher and not getting it in the way that she wanted to. And equally, mum may have had some experience out during the day that has made her feel less than valued. And all of that impact of feeling powerless or less valued in other situations then comes into the family and plays out in amongst those patterns, particularly if it's on a regular basis, and those kind of patterns are rather embedded in experiences out in the family out in the community as well. And I'm sure for those of you who've had a chance to look at the family scenario, situations like being made redundant or taking, a member of the family taking on a new role, a new learning situation may well impact within the family too. Thank you, Aileen. I think in terms of engaging, this will be very familiar concept to all of you too. It is, I think, particularly important with families because they often come feeling so helpless about what's happening, about what's uncomfortable and painful and difficult. And they do come expecting a fixed job, from anybody, from a therapist or a practitioner who is working with them. And they look for advice, they look for straightforward direction as to what they need to do. And it's particularly important with families in that often different members of the family are looking for an alliance with the therapist or the practitioner. They're looking to get you on their side. And really the whole basis of the early part of the work is to put the problem of the issue out into the family as a whole and not get it into the position of being pulled in as the fixer. But this is, I suppose, where I find most success if I actually come to the end of working with a family and they're able to take on the process of change themselves, if they actually do say to me, well, I don't think you did very much. And I think, well, fine, that's, if they see it as having the family having taken on the process of change and solution themselves, that's all to the good. Okay, thank you very much, Aileen. Okay, there's some big phrases around this idea. I suppose the one that comes up most in the literature and the research is this very unwieldy phrase, multi-directional partiality. But basically what that means is that in working with families, whether you have all of the family in the room with you or whether you are working with individuals or couples together or with children, that there are the empty chairs there, if not everybody is there, and that you are you're working with all the voices that are there. And that's can be problematic if you haven't got everybody physically with you, but it is making sure that you have a space, at least for those you have with you, to speak about what they think others would say about what's happening in the room there and what they're saying. So it is very deliberately and directively making a space for each voice. And that can be difficult, often with families who go in and there's a lot of shouting across each other and a lot of not listening to what each other is saying. And sometimes it can be like a stage manager role, that you are saying, right, 5 minutes to you and 5 minutes to you and 5 minutes to you, each to tell me how you see the problem from your perspective. So that aspect of the role can be quite directive. But it is in this process of trying to put the problem and the solution back out into the family group. And part of that is avoiding alliances with anybody, any individual, and making clear that your role is for family change, not for individual solutions. Okay, thank you, Aileen. And I'll come back to this when we look at hopefully there'll be time to look at the family scenario at the end, with this in mind. Structure is a key feature, structure of families, and there is a particular school of family therapy called the structural school, which looks at the kind of natural structures that families do fall into, particularly when things are difficult. You tend to get alliances forming as a defensive response to the discomfort and the pain. Sometimes, the common one is between mother and son and father and daughter, or between the siblings against the parents. Particularly if there's couple difficulties, you may often get that happening. Triangulation is a particularly tricky one, where you have, for example, in the family scenario that I spoke about, where you have three members of a family actually very strongly allied as a defense against the issues, and you get others that are excluded from that triangle. And it's often helpful to visualize and to work with the family on that kind of triangle, and the impact on, what it feels like to be in the triangle and what it feels like to be excluded from it. And clearly that works with the issues of boundaries around relationships and roles and tasks within the family. Who does what, whose boundaries around discipline might be different from others. How is that experienced? What are the boundaries between the family and the outside world? That's a very important one in terms of, are there other folk coming in and out all the time who kind of blur what's happening, or is the family very enclosed and doesn't really allow any influence from outside? Parents don't go to school meetings because of being afraid of what they might hear, that kind of example. Thank you, Aileen. So this brings me very much into another key idea, a systemic idea, which is about the feeling aspects, the emotional experience of the family, which is clearly strongly related to the structural and systemic aspects in other ways. I think it's often possible when you go to work with a family and you go through their door, you get a sense of what the emotional experience is like for families, who feels powerless and who feels in control and who feels that they have to fight back. And some of that is about this idea of boundaries and this idea of how the family sees itself in relation to itself and to the outside world. These two key ideas about enmeshment and disengagement. Sometimes you find that relationships are very enmeshed and established and rigid, that the same patterns occur over and over again. There's very little influence from outside social networks, friends, and so on. And the opposite, I suppose, these are two extremes, where the family are very disengaged with each other and everybody is going along on parallel lines. There's very little emotional connection, very little talk about, what sort of day did you have today, and, how can we help with that, and so on. That must have been difficult, that kind of process. So there's the two extremes there. And that does connect with the kind of teams and alliances that have built up as to how, how enmeshed and disengaged some members of the family may find their team outside the family and really disengaged from the point of view of, other than just coming to sleep there or whatever. And some of that is normal in terms of sort of adolescent stuff, but it does have an impact on the family in terms of how powerful and important and connected the family feels. Clearly, this has links with, the parents' own experience of family and what that meant to them, and the kind of circular patterns that they brought in from their own childhood experience and family life. This does tend to be very unconscious stuff that can become quite automatic, and it can be quite a light bulb moment when people realise how they're responding and reacting to others in terms of their attachments and their relationships. Thank you, Aileen. some ideas, some references here, and some further reading for you. I find the Walker book particularly helpful because it does look at what's in a name, in the sense that this is not about, family therapists in inverted commas working, with whole families or in clinical settings or whatever. That these kind of ideas are very important and significant, and can be applied in so many different ways and interpreted by all of those who work with professionals, with families in the community, whatever their different focus and perspective and the nature of their task. So I would recommend that one to you. It's an accessible read and very helpful, whatever professional background and discipline you are coming from. Okay, just to spend the last couple of minutes, and there isn't going to be more time than that, I think, to look at the family scenario that was posted out to you yesterday. Aileen, is there time for that? Probably a minute or two.
Yes. Yes, Sarah, there is. Yes, that would be helpful.
Hopefully some questions that you come up with, and I hope there will be lots, will relate to this once you've given some thought to with some of the ideas I've presented. But there's heaps in there and within that family setup, and again, this is not something that we consider horribly dysfunctional. Not that I like that word, but this is not about something that we would consider happens to others and not to ourselves. There's lots in there that we can all recognize and connect to from our own family lives and from the families that we're working with. But you could actually start with any of these kind of issues anywhere. Each of those family members, whether Tom with his experience of redundancy and the huge change in his life there, and the change in his drinking patterns, mother's reaction to that, but the fact that she has a change of role recently in her life and is looking to her own learning experiences, and the stress of actually managing family life with that new aspect of her individual experience, and the children's very individual reactions to that. Neil really, I suppose, taking a disengaged approach to what's happening here and looking for his experiences, his relationships out with the family. And Sandra, I suppose, being very closely impacted within the family in terms of her alliance with her father, and the kind of teams that have been set up. If you look at those, there seems to be quite a strong triangle between Tom and his mother and Sandra, and with Jane and Neil as a team, and the kind of impact that has on the family life as a whole. I think there's an awful lot that could be said about this family, but I'm aware that the clock is ticking. So I hope that you'll come back with me with your thoughts about this particular family and the links that you've been able to make with what I've said, but also with your own practice experience. Thank you. I've enjoyed that new experience, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Sarah. It appears that there aren't very many people who've been able to listen live this morning, so we don't have any questions at the moment from the postings. And I wonder if you could just maybe take one question from me, which is just to think about these ideas will inform the professionals, as you said before, that are working in all sorts of contexts with families. If people are working with families to engage them in learning, what do you think are the most important aspects of this way of thinking about things that they could bring to that work?
Well, I think in the sense of, you mean if one individual is looking to develop their experience through lifelong learning opportunities, or to take on a different individual experience out with the family? Or are you looking at it from the point of view of how the family as a whole deals with understanding, or both?
Well, I think it's about if family learning is about trying to engage all of the members of a family in learning, how can these ideas inform professionals who want to engage the family in learning together?
What kind of learning together? I suppose it would help me to think about an illustration of what you mean by learning together.
That could be learning together as part of uh, um, a book club or a cafe or a parents and toddlers group. Those kinds of different contexts, perhaps, Sarah.
I mean, I would see the 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 naming of learning together really very much as a similar naming to an issue or a problem. I've maybe used those kind of words and definitions because that's where I would tend to come in. But you know, I would see that that concept of learning together as being as open to this way of working with families as working with a particular identified problem. So, I mean, it's the other side of the coin, if you like. And I would be, in any work I do with family, I would be looking for that kind of positive reframing or renaming of, you know, the family being able to work together on a solution. And clearly that would involve looking at the kind of resources and networks that they might need, or the ideas, the activities that they might. And, you know, often, I mean, I haven't had a chance, obviously, in the time to talk about some of the ideas, but once the family was seeing, I suppose, the issues that they have or the significant aspects of their family life as being a collective, I would then work with, well, you know, what kind of activity, what kind of homework task might you take away to think about, you know, who might do what with whom. And that might be working with individual teams within the family. Like, as you said, it might be mum going out with toddler. If there are, and it's particularly helpful if that then works differently with teams and alliances, if you like. So it might be dad, you know, actually going one day with the toddler rather than mum if he's feeling excluded from that kind of experience. So you would work with triggering change through that kind of activity, and not just, in fact, often through activities together rather than using words. Because that's often, as you say, what hits the spot, and people start to see the positive connective aspects of family through that sort of positive reframing about change being learning about each other and about the family as a whole. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
thank you, Sarah. That's interesting. And I think the idea of even reframing where people are learning and what they're learning and how they're learning in a family is an interesting way of thinking about it, perhaps, for people who are working in family learning.
I mean, for example, thinking about the family scenario, you know, I would at some point see Jane, the mother, as a potential source of that positive reframing. At the moment, she's focused on dad as being the problem, but I would be working towards asking her to share what her experience of learning for herself is in quite a significant shift in her life, and how she might be able to contribute that to the family as a whole, and to Tom in particular, to sort of work on the couple aspects of that in terms of activities that they might share around learning, that he might, you know, the potential there for him to see that there might be learning opportunities for him, and, you know, in other ways she might be able to, and I would work with the relationship with Jane and Tom's mother, for example, around what Joyce might be able to experience outside the home, and who she might want to go with, and she might want to go and do something with, you know, with the two children, or, you know, there's a number of different ways that you could look at using the idea of family learning, you know, with the existing relationships to just shift them away from problem aspects. That makes sense.
Yes, I think so. And the idea of a single person's learning also being a resource for the family is perhaps an interesting one for us to think about. I hope that people will be able to watch this afterwards, Sarah, and perhaps be able to post some questions or some comments which we'll be able to pass to you, and then you'll also be able to respond to those for us. For the moment, I'd just like to say thank you very much for doing this for us. It's been very interesting, and I hope that there will be comments that we'll be able to relay to you later on. Many
I,
thanks, Sarah.
I suppose I maybe need to take my microphone off now, do I? But it was just to say that it is a big subject, and please do come back with questions, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you.